The autumn of 1915 had descended upon the Gallipoli Peninsula like a terrestrial branch of hell. The sky was neither the ancestral azure blue of Turkish lore, nor a canvas for the free-drifting clouds. The sky here was a sick, constantly moaning creature, torn asunder by iron and fire, poisoned by the wheezing breath of artillery shells. The soil was not the maternal earth that had offered bounty for millennia. It was a cold, viscous sea of mud, kneaded with decaying bodies, rusting shrapnel, and an unceasing pain. Within this sea, in trenches that scarred the earth like deep, open wounds, existence was not lived, but merely survived. In one of the deepest, darkest folds of this wound lived Kemal, or rather, he tried to exist. They called him Kara Kemal, Black Kemal. This name came not from his sun-darkened skin weathered by the frosts of Sivas, nor from his dark eyes and brows. It was the name of the pitch-black darkness that had infiltrated his soul, the abyssal fear that had settled in his gaze. Kemal was no longer the young man who wouldn't flinch at a stork's shadow passing over his fields back home. The Kemal here was a shadow himself, imprisoned within his own body, living in terror of the metal birds that rained death from the sky at any moment. The faint embers of patriotism and youthful excitement that had flickered in his heart while boarding the steamship from Istanbul had been extinguished by the very first mortar shell that struck the front. All that remained was a primal instinct to hide. The trench was both his tomb and his womb. The outside was absolute death, the inside an agonizing vigil. When the bugle sounded the charge and valiant men threw themselves over the top with cries of Allah, Allah, Kemal's body would betray him. His muscles would lock, his breath would catch in his throat, and he would hear nothing but the roar of blood in his own ears. Men would push and drag him, but to no avail. Fear, like an invisible armor, welded him to the trench floor. This condition quickly became the talk of the unit. The whispers began behind his back, then morphed into mocking smirks to his face. Kara Kemal has retreated to his den again. While we go to our deaths, he dreams of his mother's lap. Words like these cut deeper than any enemy bullet. Kemal heard them, but he could not find the strength to respond. Shame fed his fear, and his fear deepened his shame. It was an unbreakable cycle. His only light, his only sanctuary in this hell, was Corporal Ali. Ali was from the town next to Kemal's village, a young sapling of a man with a fledgling mustache and eyes that always smiled, full of life. Unlike Kemal, he was one of those who believed with all his heart that this war would soon end, and he would return to his village, to his fiancée. When he saw Kemal's state, he wouldn't scold him. On the contrary, he tried to protect him. "Leave Kemal be," he would tell the others. "Not every man is built for this. His heart can't take it. Let him pray while we fight." At night, during the quietest moments in the trench, in the eerie silence of a ceasefire, he would sidle up to Kemal, sharing the last sip of water from his canteen. "Do you ever think of the village?" he'd ask Kemal. "This mud will dry, Kemal. You'll see. We'll plow those fields again. The cherry blossoms must be in bloom back home now. I can smell them all the way from here. Can you?" Kemal would only nod, unable to speak. He knew that if he spoke, he would weep. To think of his village, his mother, was like lighting a bright lamp in this darkness, and his eyes had grown too accustomed to the dark to bear the light. After Ali left, his trembling hands would reach for the small pouch sewn into the inner pocket of his jacket. From it, he would draw the single letter, its edges frayed from moisture and fingerprints, its folds nearly torn through. His mother's letter. His mother, barely literate, had dictated it to the village imam. Kemal knew every letter, every word by heart. "My lion son, my Kemal, the light of my eyes, my mind is always with you. Do not tire yourself. Do not catch a cold. Obey your commanders, but most importantly, take care of yourself, your body and your soul." The last sentence felt as if it had come not from the imam, but directly from his mother's soul. Every time Kemal read it, he felt his mother's calloused hand stroking his head. It was the only thing in this inhuman place that reminded him he was human. That night, a more sinister wind than usual was blowing over the trenches. Rain drizzled, making the mud even more adhesive. The captain had gathered the squad leaders. Whispers spread along the trench like an anxious hum. A night raid was to be conducted on the machine gun nest perched on one of the enemy's most strategic hills, the damned nest that had been bleeding them dry for days. The mission was codenamed the Silencer. Everyone knew it was a suicide mission. The chances of returning were next to none. When volunteers were called for, one of the first to step forward was Corporal Ali. He chose 20 of the most fearless, most agile soldiers to join him. When Kemal heard Ali's name, he felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. As they prepared, Ali came to him. The familiar smile was gone from his face. His eyes were serious and deep. "Kemal," he said softly, "forgive me my faults." Kemal swallowed hard. "Ali, don't go," he managed to whisper. His voice was so faint he barely heard himself. Ali placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. "If that nest isn't silenced, we'll all die here tomorrow morning. Someone has to go, brother. You watch over those who remain and pray." Ali and his 20 heroes, their faces and weapons blackened with charcoal, melted into the night like ghosts. The trench fell into a deathly silence. For Kemal, this silence was more terrifying than the most violent bombardment. It was a blank page on which his imagination wrote its most savage, bloodiest scenarios. He pictured Ali being shot, torn apart, murmuring his name with his last breath. Each second stretched into an eternity. His hand went involuntarily to the letter over his heart. Even his mother's tender words could not melt the massive ice inside him. And then the anticipated hell broke loose. From the distance, right from the hill where the raid was taking place, came a single scream, followed by the familiar metallic rattle of that infernal machine. It didn't stop for a moment. It was as if the devil's sewing machine was stitching the black fabric of the night with threads of fire. In between, the sporadic cracks of their own Mauser rifles could be heard, but they sounded so helpless, so feeble next to that roar. Exploding hand grenades illuminated the sky for brief instants, and in those flashes, the men in the trench could see one another's chalk-white faces. Kemal covered his ears. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Stop, please, just stop," he begged inwardly. But the sound didn't stop. If anything, it grew more ferocious. It was the sound of a scythe tearing the flesh from the bones of Ali and his friends. For the first time, Kemal's conscience hammered against the shell of his fear with such violence. The weight of having left him alone, of having responded to his farewell with a feeble whisper, was like tons of earth collapsing on him. Hours passed. The machine gun fire was now sporadic. Then, at the edge of the trench, a dark shape appeared in the mud. It was a wounded soldier, crawling, pulling himself toward the trench with his last ounce of strength. Two privates rushed to drag him inside, into the dim light of a gas lamp. It was Hussein from Konya, from Ali's squad. His leg was mangled, his face unrecognizable.
"Water!" he groaned. They pressed a canteen to his lips. After a few sips, he began to speak in broken gasps. "A trap! They were waiting for us. They spotted us before we even reached the hill. That damn machine, it mowed us all down. We couldn't retreat." His eyes were wide with horror. "Ali, the corporal, he shot the gunner. But then he was hit. The others too. They're there, trapped in that crater. The machine started firing again. It's cut off our retreat. They can't get out. They can't get out of there." Hussein's final words exploded like a bomb in Kemal's mind. Ali was alive, wounded, and trapped in a crater with only a few hundred meters separating him from death. When morning came, the daylight would make them easy prey. There was only one way to get them out of there. That machine gun nest had to be silenced forever. There was only one way. And in that moment, a tiny crack formed in the mass of fear that had encased Kemal's soul like a tumor for years. The emotion that seeped through that crack was hotter, stronger, more unbearable than fear. It was the certainty of loss, the agony of losing his brother, his only friend in this hell, finally vanquished his fear of death. As if in slow motion, Kemal stood up. The few remaining soldiers in the trench stared at him as if they had seen a ghost. This was Kara Kemal, who flinched at every sound. But now he was standing. He was trembling, yes, but this time it wasn't just from fear. It was from the violence of the storm raging inside him. The familiar emptiness was gone from his eyes. In its place was a desperate, almost insane resolve, ignited by hopelessness and despair. He didn't say a word to anyone. He walked to the ammunition pouch left beside the wounded Hussein. He counted the hand grenades inside. 4. With the 2 on his own belt, that made 6. He took extra magazines. He checked his bayonet. His every movement was mechanical, his expression blank. He didn't see the astonished looks around him. He heard nothing but the roaring in his ears. He walked toward the climbing steps of the trench. His muddy boots stuck to the ground. With every step, the cowardly voice inside him pleaded, "Don't! This isn't you. You must survive. This is madness. This is suicide." But another voice, a voice as gentle as his mother's, yet as commanding, drowned it out. He put his hand on his chest. The letter was there. He remembered the last sentence. "My son, it is not a shame to be afraid. It is a shame to be a slave to your fear." The sentence flashed in his mind like lightning. For years he had been a slave to this fear, a prisoner in a cell. Ali had always spoken to him of freedom, of cherry trees, wheat fields, his fiancée's smile. This was freedom, to be free from captivity. And he understood in that moment that if he did not leave this trench, he would die not by an enemy bullet, but by suffocating in the prison of his own fear. He took a deep breath. The air that filled his lungs stank of gunpowder and mud, but for the first time in that air there was a hint of freedom. He placed his foot on the first step, then the second. When he reached the edge of the trench, he looked down one last time at the men below. There was no farewell in his eyes, no expression of heroism. Only the empty but determined gaze of a man going to do what had to be done. And then he pushed himself up, disappearing into the darkness of the night and of no man's land. The moment he was out of the trench, all the sounds of the world assaulted him. The howl of the wind, the distant boom of artillery, the deafening thunder of his own heart. His body, with its millions of nerve endings, was screaming, "Danger! Go back! Hide!" But his body was no longer a slave to his soul.
He began to crawl. His elbows and knees were bleeding, scraped by the stones and wire fragments in the mud. Every few meters he would freeze, playing dead as a flare illuminated the sky. When the flare's hissing light died, he would see the landscape around him. Dismembered bodies, overturned helmets, rifles stuck in the mud. This was the place where life ended. He knew the location of the machine gun nest. Hussein had described it. A rocky recess under 3 large oak trees. He moved towards the sound and the sporadic tongue of fire that spat from its mouth. Every muscle in his body screamed in pain. His lungs burned. But he did not stop. A single image was seared into his mind. Ali, lying wounded in a crater. This image was a more powerful driving force than the sharpest pain. Finally, he was within 50 meters of the nest. He could make out the silhouettes of 2 soldiers. One was on the machine gun, the other feeding it an ammunition belt. They were firing in bursts, scanning the area. Kemal slid into a large crater. He tried to regulate his breathing. His hand went to the grenades on his belt. He felt the cold metal. The plan was simple. But everything simple here was impossibly difficult. He pulled the pins of 2 grenades simultaneously. His heart felt like it would burst from his chest. His mother's face, Ali's smile, the dusty roads of his village flashed before his eyes like a film strip. If he was to die, he would not die a coward, a nobody. The prisoner inside him would break his chains tonight. He burst out of the crater with all his might. Those few seconds felt like a lifetime. He was a target suspended in the air. The enemy soldiers saw him and shouted.
The barrel of the machine gun began to turn towards him, but they were too late. Kemal threw the grenades with all his strength towards the nest. The moment he hit the ground, the world was shaken by a deafening roar. As dirt and rock fragments rained down on him, that infernal rattling stopped. For a moment, an absolute silence fell. Kemal didn't savor it. He was instantly on his feet, bayoneted Mauser in hand, and charged towards the still-smoking nest. He heard a groan from within. Without hesitation, he plunged inside. That silence was received in the trench behind him like a miracle. Everyone held their breath, trying to understand what had happened. Then a voice came from their own lines. "Fall back! The way is clear! Move!" It was Kemal's voice, hoarse, raspy, but clear. This was the signal for the survivors. One by one, dragging their wounded comrades, they began to emerge from that death pit and run towards their own trench. The last one to arrive was the slowest, because he was carrying another man on his back. As the moonlight broke through the clouds, everyone saw the sight. It was Kemal, and on his back was the blood-soaked Corporal Ali. Kemal gently lowered Ali to the ground and collapsed beside him, his strength completely gone. Day was breaking. The horizon was stained a blood red. The men of the trench gathered around them. No one spoke. The mocking looks, the contemptuous whispers were gone, replaced by astonishment, gratitude, and a profound respect. As the medics tended to Ali's wound, he opened his eyes. A pained smile appeared on his face. "Kemal, are you insane? Why did you do it?" Kemal was exhausted. His trembling hand went to his chest again. He pulled out the crumpled letter. Instead of answering, he opened it so Ali could see and pointed with his finger to the last sentence. "My son, it is not a shame to be afraid. It is a shame to be a slave to your fear."